Woo! All right. Someone have some Kleenex on the side for me after I get off stage. So I have the honor of introducing this next panel. It is an incredible panel to talk about the future of LGBTQ rights. And so, without further ado, I will introduce the moderator, Monique Darsonville, who has had a front seat to history for the last decade, and is the former Deputy Chief of Staff for the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs at the White House. I'd also like to bring to stage Chris Perry and Sandy Steer, No on Prop 8 lead plaintiffs. And it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce Cleve Jones, who is the author of When We Rise, which is premiering next week on ABC, which you just saw a clip from, and the founder of the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. Woo!
Let's give Angelique a round of applause. I would wake up with her any morning. You are the hype woman. Love you so much. And thank you to all of you for being here so bright and early. I am so excited to have this conversation. And I actually want to dive in by talking about Cleve. So Cleve Jones, as Angelique mentioned, was a renowned civil rights activist and the founder of the Names Project. And they essentially used the AIDS Memorial Quilt to raise awareness and drive action to bring an end to AIDS domestically and internationally. Cleve is also the author of When We Rise, which we've just seen has been adapted into a miniseries. Congratulations, Cleve, huge deal. And it airs on ABC on Monday, so everyone please tune in. Chris, you really need no introduction. Chris was the lead plaintiff in the Perry versus Schwarzenegger case, and that's really the case that restored marriage equality to California. No big deal. Chris also co-authored Love on Trial, which is an autobiography that really looks at life before and after Prop 8. Sandy Steer is a senior advisor at the Office of Health and Human Services based in DC. She is the co-plaintiff in the Prop 8 case. Most people affectionately know you as Chris's co-conspirator, Chris's boss, Chris's better half. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So Cleve, I would like to dive in with you. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I worked at the White House for President Obama for 8 years, and I led outreach efforts with grassroots communities across the country. As Valerie Jarrett's Deputy Chief of Staff, my team worked to lift up the very communities that the Trump administration is really trying to extinguish on a day-to-day basis. When I started at the White House in 2010, one of the first things I worked on was Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. And one thing that I've noticed over the years, I see a lot of folks talk about the incredible progress that we made in 8 years, which we did, but a lot of folks are looking at it in a bit of a vacuum. You have to look at these movements because they're inextricably linked. So when you look at the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the disability rights movement, none of these things happened in a vacuum. So Cleve, on that note, your memoir is a must-read for anyone who wants to know about the foundation of the LGBTQ movement. I'm curious, you moved to this area in the 1970s. I'm sure you've been to the Castro countless times. You've been down these streets, spent time in these neighborhoods. I'm curious, from your vantage point, what do people oftentimes miss about the history of the movement? What are people not seeing?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to be here. And I met these two women when we began the Prop 8 challenge in federal court. And I have such great respect and affection for them and their families. And I think, all of the people who took the courageous step of putting themselves out on the front line and being the public face of our fight for equality, it really takes a lot of courage. It can be very scary and very lonely. And now we're celebrating it, but it wasn't always easy, and these two bore a lot, so I'm grateful to them. I think a lot of people forget really the origins of our movement and how much we were a radical movement. We were a sexual liberation movement. We were a movement with our roots in the early feminist movement, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, and lately there's a kind of fashionable vocabulary of intersectionality, and I think some of these people think they've invented it, but it was what we were always about. And you know,
Yes, clap to that.
Audre Lorde wrote about this, and she said, you know, that she couldn't be a single issue. She wasn't interested in single issue politics because we don't lead single issue lives. And so I feel that some of that has been lost, and now it's really important that we get that back, because I think that it may be the one unique gift that LGBTQIA, whatever we're calling ourselves this year, has, is that we are born into every color of skin, every ethnic background, every faith background, every economic status, and every gender and every circumstance that one could imagine. So maybe during this critical time in our nation's history, and indeed the history of the planet, maybe we can be the bridge builders that can unite people to resist and rise up and fight back against Donald Trump and what he's trying to do to our country.
Amen. Chris, I want to hear from your perspective. Tell me about how you met Cleve, and tell me just about some of your favorite memories.
Well, Cleve doesn't know this, but I moved here to go to social work school at San Francisco State in 1986. And part of why I wanted to move to San Francisco was because Cleve was doing what he was doing with the Memorial Quilt and the Names Project, but also because people like Roma Guy and Ken Jones and Pat Norman and Sally Gerhardt were teaching and leading grassroots efforts in San Francisco and taking on these really challenging problems we find ourselves still dealing with, which is access to healthcare, access to good quality education. And that social work experience put me in an internship at the Human Rights Commission where Phyllis and Dell were co-chairs, believe it or not. And so I would go to San Francisco City Hall at 21 years old in awe of everything that had happened there and in great, reverence to what had happened to Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone. And Cleve doesn't know this, but I knew who he was because I was looking up to him and all of his peers and thinking, how will I ever be anything like them? And it helped to know that they were there and fighting every day. And believe it or not, I got plucked out of a little tiny lesbian political action group by Roma Guy when she was doing the Women's Building and a bunch of other really important work here in San Francisco. And she said, we need younger people to help us organize and do things. Come with me. And so we all followed her off to the Women's Building and sat on folding chairs and put leaflets up and had conferences like this at Mission High School on lesbians who wanted to be politically active. And I was only 21, I'm a little older than that now. So what Cleve doesn't know is the day that we met, when we launched the case against Prop 8 in California that he had so valiantly fought to defeat, I had felt like I'd known Cleve my whole life. And the really, really wonderful thing is all of our sons now feel like Cleve is their great uncle. And so I love that they have the same reverence and admiration for you that I did at the very same age in their early 20s. So that's how I got to know Cleve.
Really special.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Sandy, you came out when you were 35, which was like
a child
last year.
A child, basically. It's so recent. So recent.
So like Chris and Cleve, you grew up in a very conservative enclave of this country. I am curious. I want to hear your story. Tell us about your story.
So this conservative enclave is Iowa. I'm from Iowa, and I grew up not only in Iowa, but on a farm in Iowa. So rural, where the women, by the way, are badass. You think you're badass? Women in Iowa on farms, they are badass. They are hard-working people. So the one thing I brought to my life as an adult was I was a hard-working girl, and we were brave girls, and we never thought we couldn't do really anything. That's just kind of our family value. But my story is, to me, it's a love story. I grew up and moved to San Francisco, lived in this area, started a family, had young children. And I was very busy being an early lesbian who not only teched, but who taught tech. So one of my first jobs as a young adult was to teach social workers how to use computers. Now, these social workers were very unhappy about the idea they'd use computers. It was a huge invasion of their personal space and privacy. The unions were angry. They cried at work. They cried in my class, except one person didn't cry. One person was flashing her big old dimples, and that was Chris Perry.
Oh, wow.
So I'm in front of the room telling everybody, now this is a mouse. Don't pick it up. Put it down and leave it down and stop waving it around like a TV remote.
Were you picking it up intentionally so that she could tell you to put it down?
Chris was in the back going like this. What's up to you? And just flashing me the big grin. And one look at that smile, and essentially I was hooked, which led to lots of complications in my life, as you can well imagine. Because at 35 years old, this Midwestern girl from Iowa, who was raised in a staunch Catholic family, of conservative folks, but democratically conservative folks, they were not exactly thrilled with this information that suddenly I was professing my love for Chris Perry. But some things are worth fighting for. Our case is worth fighting for, our rights are worth fighting for, our love was worth fighting for. So kind of regardless of my family, not really being totally thrilled about it, and some of my friends really questioning my decision making and my choices, I forged ahead and I went after this one like a ton of bricks, and she eventually responded. It took a little while. It took a lot of eyeliner, and eventually it took some lingerie shopping, but that worked out well. So that is my story.
Now we know the tricks of the trade. Thank you for giving us the playbook. So Cleve, you premiered When We Rise here in this theater earlier this week. You're now surrounded by lots of lesbians. Are you just a little bit jealous that you're not a lesbian? You can tell me, I won't tell.
I thought there would be more of you here. It was my understanding that lesbians get up at 5:30, walk the dog, wash the Subaru, go to the gym, and have granola, and are out there, where are you? But, so I'm glad you're here. I'm curious to know how many of you are from the Bay Area and how many of you came. So from Bay Area, raise your hands. Cool.
Or clap.
I would like to let you know about something I'm involved with now, and I think it's a really important effort and maybe helps us see a way forward in the years to come. I work for a union called Unite Here, and our members are overwhelmingly female, overwhelmingly immigrants. We are the Hospitality Workers Union. We also represent food service workers and many of the workers on the tech campuses in Silicon Valley. And you who work in those companies are going to have the opportunity to show solidarity with some of your sisters who are working for minimum wage and struggling to keep their families together, working for these very wealthy corporations. So I want you to be aware that this is a union that is really fighting for the rights of women, gay and straight, cisgender, transgender, women and men of all colors and backgrounds, and I'm proud to be part of that. I also think that if there's this many employed lesbians, why can this town not have one lesbian bar? What is up with that?
Thank you.
What is up with that? They closed the Lexington Club.
Someone here
When I
needs to
was
hack
young,
that.
there were 12 lesbian bars in this town. Would you please get it together?
So Cleve, in that vein, I think you hit on something really important. Everyone talks about intersectionality, but how do you you've actually led a movement and done this successfully. How do you do this successfully without co-opting or appropriating other movements?
Yeah, I think that the conversation is starting to get frustrating to me because so much of our conversations are focused on the differences between us. And it reduces us more and more into our little zones of comfort where everybody looks like us and thinks like us and talks like us. And the algorithms just accentuate that. As you know from your news feeds, you see more and more. My brother-in-law, who's still in touch with his Trump-supporting family in Arizona, receives much different information than I get when I turn on Facebook. So I think part of it is to really look for common ground and to be kind of disciplined about doing that. It was something I learned from Harvey Milk, who was this older Jewish guy that came here from New York City and just won the hearts of San Francisco. And he did it by being really fearless and just approaching all different kinds of people and saying, "Hi, I'm Harvey Milk." And he'd begin a conversation that would find that bit of common ground. Now, it can be difficult, and as a heterophobic teen, you know, it was really startling for me. I would have built a wall around my neighborhood to keep straight people out. But we need to be disciplined about this, and we need to reject all of the rhetoric that divides us from each other. If your capacity for empathy is defined or diminished by the color of your skin or your gender or your generation, then we are in deep trouble, because everything we hold dear is at stake right now. So all of those boundaries and barriers that people create between ourselves, we need to tear them down and reach across them and lift each other up. It's so important right now.
Thank you. Chris, building on that theme of common ground, outside of the context that most of us know you in, you are the executive director of the First 5 Years Fund. I want you to tell us, what do LGBTQ organizing and movements have to do with early childhood education?
I know it doesn't seem like they do, but in my world and in my head they do, and that's because both are addressing policies that are in place in this country that separate children from their future in ways that are, frankly, so fundamental, so foundational to their success later on, that we have to remove or tweak or replace those policies. And early childhood education is based on literally volumes of data that show that children who get a strong start, whether that's through high quality education or childcare, do better the rest of their lives. They're on a trajectory that goes like this. Everything you're talking about here is based on having had a very optimal learning experience along the way. So you can handle highly complex analytical tasks as adults and hopefully have very happy relationships as well. Children who grow up without that have a flatter trajectory, and there are policies that can keep that from happening. So that's what I do every other minute of the day, then I'm not here doing this. The marriage equality fight, in my mind, is about kids too. And I was one of those kids. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, only 4 hours away from here, but it might as well have been 4,000 miles away from here. I was in a very, very conservative, politically conservative environment, and I knew I was different, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know why, because there were no role models or anyone for me to look to say, oh, I'm that. There are kids still growing up in Bakersfield and all over this country, even with marriage equality, who feel othered and different and less than, and their trajectory is flatter too. So as somebody who really cares about optimal child development and policies that enhance rather than diminish who we are as people and keep us away from messages that say we're less than, that's what I'm passionate about. Early childhood education also is really fun because little kids are so cute. And we have so many of them, Sandy and I together, that we like looking at the little version that other people have. One fun story about Monique, though, that she might not remember, in one of the many events we were fortunate to host in partnership with the White House over these last several years, I had the pleasure of seeing you in action with the president while you were trying to corral many, many little children and their parents while they were going to have the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of meeting President Obama. And Monique somehow had the ability to go from talking to very important adults about things to corralling little tiny kids. And of course, the president couldn't have been a better advocate on both issues, on marriage equality and early childhood development.
I did not remember that. So
yes, I saw you and thought, look at her, she's crawling around, now she's standing up, now she's shaking hands.
I was in the zone.
You were amazing, you were amazing.
Sandy, I want to ask you, so the case against Prop 8 that you and Chris waged in federal court, you've really called that coalition a bipartisan dream team, led by Ted Olson and David Boies. So how do you think that partnership really helped make the conservative case for marriage? And how did that partnership come about?
Well, that was actually an amazing experience. So first of all, the case started out Perry versus Schwarzenegger. And for those of you who don't know, before Chris was working in Washington, D.C., doing advocacy at the federal level, she was running an organization in California. In fact, she was an appointee of Schwarzenegger. So it could have been called Perry Sues Her Boss. Good luck with that, because that's essentially what it was. But so the Perry case that we were a part of that ended up in the Supreme Court, that was the California gay marriage case, was artfully constructed by the great, generosity of individuals like Cleve, who brought his foresight, his experience as an activist to bear, and helped with a lot of fundraising efforts and a lot of engagement efforts. But it was led by the dream team of David Boies and Ted Olson. And we called it the conservative case for gay marriage because Ted Olson and David Boies were very different lawyers. And in fact, they had come and battled against each other at Bush versus Gore. So the joke for them was, between them, they'd had every single Supreme Court judge on their side at least one time. So they thought, surely we, as a team, can bring them to our side again. But what was so powerful about that team is that they really could appeal to so many people in this country, whether people in positions of leadership, like our president, who came around during the case after Joe Biden kind of like blurted out, "Yay, gay marriage." Obama was like, "Yeah, gay marriage," So, but hey, a win is a win. But having that team work together to really look at this common issue. We all want access to marriage, and it doesn't need to be a political act. We want to get it out of politics, certainly get it out of the hands of voters, and just realize it for what it is. We have a constitutional right to be happy. We have a constitutional right to form families and to be protected. Our 14th Amendment tells us that. And their advocacy together was what really enabled us to be successful, not only in the courts, but also with the public. They did so many kind of outreach efforts. The Newsweek magazine article, literally called The Conservative Case for Gay Marriage, was incredibly impactful because those magazines, those newspaper articles, those news clips make their way into the average American's hands. And when you have somebody in Lincoln, Nebraska, picking up the paper, turning on the TV, and seeing Ted Olson say, "I believe that marriage is something that is accessible to all people. It is their fundamental right," that is a powerful thing. So we can learn a lot from that experience. And I think it can be applied to many other types of civil rights activities and efforts. And hopefully, especially these next few years, we can see that same kind of coalition come around and keep fighting for us.
Thank you.
And I care about this.
I can tell. Fired up, as President Obama would
ready
say.
to go. That's right.
We need to be fired up. So just building on the current moment, Cleve, at the end of your book, you talk about how much hope you have for the LGBTQ movement, and you specifically say, "It's easy to be overwhelmed by the challenges that face us. It is easy to be cynical. It is easy to despair." I would say that we now face considerable hurdles over the next 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. I'm curious, from your vantage point, what's the strategy for 2017, and how do you truly continue to remain hopeful when you're fighting for change?
I wrote my book because the movement saved my life. And that's not hyperbole. As a teenager, I was stealing pills from my parents because I knew I was different in a way I didn't want to be, and I really thought my life was over before it started. And then I read in Life magazine about the movement, and I flushed the pills down the toilet and hitchhiked to San Francisco. I was mentored by Harvey Milk. He was like a father to me. When I saw his dead body, I thought it was over. Everything was over. The movement was over. We'd lost our leader. I'd lost my friend. But it wasn't over. And then AIDS came, and it killed almost everyone I loved the most by 1985, and I thought it was over. And then I got sick in 1993, and I thought my life was over. There's been so many times I thought it was over, but it never is over. And you just have to pull yourself up and keep fighting. Now, I work today mostly in the labor movement. I work for the Unite here, the Hospitality Workers Union, and I think that what the work we're doing is kind of instructive, because when the rest of the country was being swept away by Trump, we won in Nevada. a right-to-work state where my union has 65,000 members, mostly Latina. We elected the first Latina to the United States Senate this past November. We took Nevada for Clinton. We took both houses of the state legislature. And south of there in Maricopa County, we registered 50,000 new Latino voters and defeated that hateful, racist, homophobe Sheriff Arpaio. Our union beat Trump twice in the last few months by organizing the workers, mostly Latina, in his casino in Las Vegas and his new hotel in Washington, D.C. So if we get beyond sort of the rhetoric and the vocabulary of intersectionality and really do the hard work of educating people, empowering people, knocking on those doors. And another thing, on the left, and I'm sure all of you have encountered this, anytime you're in a room full of people who want to do something, somebody raises their hand and says, well, let's do this, and then there's 20 people jumping on her to tell her why that won't work. They'll say, oh, voting doesn't matter, or writing letters to the editor doesn't matter, or protests don't work, or civil disobedience doesn't work. It all works. All of those tactics can be effective, but you've got to be smart, you've got to be strategic, and you've got to be relentless. And just keep doing it over and over and over, and be willing to think outside of the box and take some risks. When Chris and Sandy and that AFER team, the American Foundation for Equal Rights, took on Prop 8 in federal court, they were discouraged quite vehemently by almost every national gay lesbian organization in the country and our allies in the Democratic Party and the ACLU. The same thing with Edie Windsor. Everybody said, no, it's not time. Don't go to the Supreme Court yet. Can you imagine where we'd be now if we had waited? If we'd waited for a better court? When are we going to see a better court? So be bold, take risks, reach out, build coalitions, and be ready to fight for a long time, because this one is a big fight.
Chris and Sandy, everyone in this room looks up to you. You've done so much for the movement for marriage equality. I have two questions for you. How do you keep your marriage aflame? and what comes next?
I'll take the flame. You can take the what's next. Well, just like Cleve said, you get up every day and you're alive and you're kicking. We are alive and we are kicking in our relationship. We've got 20 years on probably most of you folks in the audience. Our kids are the millennial generation, but my gosh, I feel like we have never felt more energized in our relationship and in the world, and certainly in fighting civil rights, but also just in our own being a couple and appreciating love. I mean, I think we appreciate ourselves as a couple almost more than we ever have, having gone through these fights together, having raised children together, and now being in this new phase of life, which is, by the way, totally awesome. When the kids are gone, you think you're sad for a little while. Your parents aren't that sad. I mean, like really, 2 days after you leave, they're like, woo, break out the champagne. Remodel the house.
It's like the First Lady said when Malia moved out. She said, bye, Felicia.
Totally. So the thing we do that really, we set up a bar and we keep it all out. It's really awesome. And so we turn into like cocktail people, and it's fantastic. But it's easy. It's easy to keep it alive. It's not a problem. And I got to keep this one on her toes. Not easy.
Thank you for the blueprint. Taking some notes.
So you can see what I'm dealing with. I love
what you were lucky to be dealing with.
I love her so much. We've been married so many times that, I have many opportunities to not be married. We're married. We've been married for a really long time. But so on two fronts. Number one, if you have that spark at the beginning, you are already so fortunate. That is a very precious and important thing. And I mean that in your love lives and your personal lives. But what I also feel so privileged and honored to have is that spark in my political life. We were just really ordinary people going about our lives, and we were very fortunate to meet somebody as important as Cleve and all of his colleagues in the political world who thought we all rolled upon this. And to all of you is, You may be toiling in obscurity in a cubicle in Silicon Valley, and you could do far more than any of us have done to change this world for the better because you have tools at your disposal we never had. You have skills and connections and resources we never had, or you can take everything we have and we can do this all together. But what I loved about being a plaintiff in this case was how much of a team it was and how much we could envision a different world together and move in the same direction. So envision the world you want to live in. Find the people who have the spark in their personal and political lives and move forward with them and create the world you want to live in. This is a small piece, marriage equality, right? We have to use it to build up, and up from there, and you can do that. I know you can.
That's the perfect.
Oh, well. And next week, grab a really hot chick, get a really good cocktail, and watch When We Rise every night on ABC, because that is the show to watch.
Yep.
That's a perfect place to end. Please join me in thanking Cleve, Chris, and Sandy. Thank you, everyone.